Shambling, imposing, mysterious, unknown, invincible, and otherworldly, Pyramid Head is the most memorable monster from the Silent Hill series, and a standout among pursuer-type monsters in survival horror games. In this video, we will analyze Pyramid Head, his meaning, purpose, and contrast him to some of the other well-known pursuer monsters from other survival horror games, such as the Nemesis from Resident Evil 3, Jack Baker from RE7, and the Crow Mauler from Fear and Hunger 1. Since we'll be exploring what makes these monsters horrifying, first, let's define horror within this context. Horror, an intense feeling of fear, shock, or disgust, an attack of extreme nervousness or anxiety. So when I talk about horror, I'll be referring to the monster's ability to create a feeling of unease or fear in the player, either in the moment-to-moment gameplay or instilling a feeling that lingers with you hours after you've turned off your PC or console. Pursuer monsters are a staple in survival horror, by which I mean one standout monster or threat that will pursue the player from area to area through a large portion of the game, making the player feel constantly hunted by an unbeatable threat that adds a need of caution and a sense of urgency to movement and exploration throughout the game world. Pyramid Head from Silent Hill 2 is a standout among these types of monsters, representing a deeper, more internal form of horror that haunts you even after you've left Silent Hill. Making his popular appearance in Silent Hill 2, Pyramid Head is the most powerful monster that James will encounter throughout his journey in the once idyllic, now mysterious, vacant, and foggy vacation town of Silent Hill. He will appear early on, glaring at James while standing still on the far side of some bars in the Woodside apartments. Pyramid Head will be a constant threat and presence as James moves around the empty town, attacking and ambushing him and Maria several times at different locations, such as the Nightmare Hospital, the Labyrinth, and finally at the hotel. Pyramid Head is easily recognizable by his plain white executioner outfit, his giant sword, and of course, his iconic pyramid that he wears on his head. A pyramid that doesn't seem right, like a weight bearing down on him that a normal human couldn't withstand simply with the muscles in their neck. Kinda similar to how guilt and regret will weigh down on James. Pyramid Head will be a constant, menacing presence until the game's finale, when James is ready to confront his guilt and own up to his actions. To have a point of comparison, let's take a look at Nemesis from Resident Evil 3. Nemesis is probably the most iconic tyrant monster of the Resident Evil games, with good reason. Nemesis will serve as the main antagonist to Jill Valentine in the third game of the franchise. The remake starts with Nemesis attacking Jill in her apartment, and Jill will have to tangle with him repeatedly over the course of her escape from Raccoon City, which is really more of a town, but whatever. And she will have to deal with him until the game's conclusion in the underground Umbrella Lab. The RE3 remake starts and ends with encounters with the Nemesis. The Nemesis is a genetically engineered bioweapon manufactured by the Umbrella Corporation and is let loose in the mostly vacant but fog-free town of Raccoon City. During the outbreak of the T-virus, he will be heard frequently uttering the words STARS, which is a special police unit with the Raccoon City PD that responded to the events in the mansion in Resi 1. Through the events of Resident Evil 3, Nemesis will hunt the remaining STARS members using different weapons such as his quintessential rocket launcher, a flamethrower, or just using his watermelon-sized fist. Each time Jill faces him, she will either flee or fight him. If she deals enough damage, Nemesis will go down, leaving Jill with a weapon power-up. In the last parts of the game, we will see later stages of what the T-virus does to the Nemesis, as he takes several Cronenberg-adjacent forms of increasing size and body horror. Though, to be fair, I should take a moment to point out that while both Resident Evil and Silent Hill are both considered survival horror, they do cater to a different gaming experience, so I'm not being 100% fair in my comparisons. Silent Hill is more of a brooding, melancholic gaming experience, while Resident Evil tries to deliver more of the 80s action movie bombast. So it does kind of make sense that there would be differences in the vibes and style between both of these iconic monsters. From the first encounter with our geometric foe, Pyramid Head is perfectly capable of killing you, but he chooses not to. In one of the earliest encounters with him, James will nervously hide in a closet with nowhere to run as Pyramid Head approaches him. Defensively, James will fire his pistol at Pyramid Head to no avail. He doesn't seem to react or appear in pain in any way or form. Pyramid Head's only reaction is to take a moment and then walk away, as if he were bored or has simply lost interest. If he had wanted to, he could have very quickly ended James's exploration of Silent Hill, but his goal is not to kill James, rather something deeper than that, which we will get to. And I think this is something that adds greatly to the monster's mystery. Throughout his journey in Silent Hill, James will have to fight, or more often, escape from Pyramid Head during the events of Silent Hill 2. Pyramid Head's true purpose is to actually help him along in his journey in a way that won't be obvious to our protagonist until the end of the game. We don't know why, we don't know his motives, which makes him all the more unknowable, adding to the horror that he imbues. It's only natural for humans to fear those things that we cannot understand. Throughout the game, we never truly find out who or what is underneath the Red Pyramid. We don't learn where he comes from, or very much about him at all. We are only left with our deductions of the context and the lore. Switching back to Resident Evil 3, Nemesis, on the other hand, has a clear motivation and goal. He is trying to kill Jill Valentine and any other STARS members in Raccoon City. I don't think it's really explained why this small detachment of police from a small mountain town is targeted by a huge multinational pharmaceutical company, but we can guess that maybe the STARS members were chosen to field test Umbrella's new bioweapon, maybe as revenge for STARS blowing up the mansion and the Umbrella research facility during the first game. Throughout Resident Evil 3 and her escape from the town, Jill is able to evade him over and over again, defying the Nemesis, demonstrating that his powers are limited and that he can be bested, at least temporarily. This creates an empowerment or power fantasy of Jill being able to outsmart, outmaneuver, or successfully fight this monstrous Nemesis, and demonstrating that Jill can be powerful enough to stand toe-to-toe with this abomination under the right conditions. Fighting the monsters leads us to the next point. Pyramid Head is invulnerable to physical damage and can only be defeated through introspection, or through Pyramid Head fulfilling his role as an instrument of redemption. Nemesis can and is ultimately defeated with weapons, with a gun big enough to finally put him down once and for all. Nemesis can be defeated using engineering and ingenuity, while in contrast, there isn't a gun big enough to put Pyramid Head down, since he's more of an ethereal construct or creation born of trauma and guilt, rather than a true flesh and bones monster. How would James defeat an idea manifested into being by this haunted town? He isn't truly a physical entity. He represents how James's feeling of guilt and remorse linger and infect his every movement with an iron grip on his psyche, preventing him from healing and moving on with his life. Pyramid Head can only be defeated by forgiving yourself and acknowledging your internal pain and suffering, which is far easier said than done. I think we all know that. It is the only way to escape him. There are no guns big enough to stop Pyramid Head. The resolution must come from within. Pyramid Head doesn't appear interested in hurting James and will sometimes disregard him, like a cat playing with his prey. Nemesis is trying to kill Jill, but fails over and over again, showing that while Nemesis is fearsome, he has limitations and isn't all-powerful. It's one thing to be momentarily brave, like when fighting a pursuing monster, I would assume, but it takes a different level of dedication and work to overcome trauma or torment, the likes of which would cause the appearance of Pyramid Head. There is a difference between being resolute in a moment versus making a conscious decision every day to make a difference in how you treat yourself and moving past pain. That is why Pyramid Head is more difficult to overcome. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about a monster's origin stories. Taking a cue from indie survival horror RPG Fear and Hunger with the Crow Mauler. Like Pyramid Head and Nemesis, the Crow Mauler is another pursuer monster. He'll follow you across the different levels of the dungeon, and he is a fearsome threat in combat if he manages to catch up with you. Particularly horrifying is his peck attack that can decapitate the player in one strike. The Crow Mauler's backstory tells us that he was the leader of the prison guards of the dungeon, Captain Rudermer. He had tried to keep order in the dungeon and even reached out to the kingdom for help as chaos took its toll and spread across the dungeon. Captain Rudermer eventually fell to the darkness and the creeping madness spread by the cube of the depths, giving in and disappearing, running into the abyss, screaming in obvious insanity. His giving in to the cubes of the depths corruption means that anyone can be susceptible. If its effects strong enough to corrupt even the most senior of the guards, who we can assume was among the most faithful to the kingdom, then what chance did anyone else have? And his transformation to a monster reminds us that we could have had a similar fate, challenging us to ask ourselves, are we so sure and resolute that we could have resisted the same corruption? Pyramid Head doesn't have a backstory because he is a symbol of punishment for a sin that someone has committed. The town of Silent Hill manifests him in the form of one of its old executioners. The first Pyramid Head we encounter is spawned due to James's actions before the events of the game, and the second is spawned after James kills Eddie underneath Toluca Lake. Nemesis doesn't have a backstory or very much lore. He is simply a means for violence and kinetic spectacle needed to create a constant threat which hunts the protagonist. But what if we knew more about the origin of this monster? What if Nemesis had been a kind, brave, or noble person before some series of unfortunate events led to Umbrella transforming him into a monster? Would we have felt a more innate sense of horror and tragedy with the Nemesis if we knew that he didn't want to follow Umbrella's orders, being forced to hunt Star members and was incapable of stopping himself? Lost within primal instincts of a monster it's become, a captive in its own body, witnessing his own transformation and eventually becoming a murderous agent of a cold, uncaring corporation that experimented on him. But Resi does know how to use the power of a moving backstory to inspire and amplify horror. Within the same universe, we get Jack Baker from Resident Evil 7. Throughout the first half of the game, he functions as a pursuer monster, being a constant threat that hunts you across the house. A threat that Ethan will have to fight again and again. He appears unkillable, persistent, and determined to deal with any intruders in his home. He is the patriarch of his twisted family, dominating everyone as we see in the dinner table scene. Your impression of him for most of the game might be something similar to that of the Tyrants or Nemesis of the previous Resident Evil games. But all that changes when we get a flashback scene from before the mold having taken over the Baker residence. We see a gentle and mild-mannered Jack, his body language telling us that he isn't heavy-handed, violent, or lacking empathy. He explains how Evelyn has a way of digging into your soul and mind, changing you, making you one of her pawns. And all the while, Jack is aware of this, slowly losing his free will and individuality. And even worse, watching the same happen to his dear family. As our understanding of Jack grows, so does the menace and horror of the game, as we see this family being dragged into corruption. This realization adds a whole new dimension to all the previous encounters with him. It recontextualizes each time you fought him, learning that he is imprisoned in his own body as a flesh puppet for Evelyn. He doesn't want to hunt nor hurt you. And even once you defeat him in combat, the thought that you killed an innocent man might haunt you and stay with you, adding a deeper and more unnerving dimension to your time in the Baker house. To make it all worse, all this happened to the Baker family because Jack sheltered a child stranded after a boating accident. The reward for his kindness is the loss of his autonomy and his family, a helpless bystander to forces he can neither understand nor control. His family is sacrificed to Evelyn's desire to find a family of her own. He sincerely begs you to free his family, though he knows it's too late for them, but he still holds on to hope because, well, what else can you do in a desperate situation but hold on to hope? Nemesis is ultimately defeated in Resident Evil 3's finale when Jill uses a railgun on him, finally blasting enough of him apart for him to not be able to reconstitute. A bit over the top and exaggerated, but damn if it isn't gratifying to watch Jill, fed up with Nemesis shit, finally tear him apart with space-age technology. Pew pew! Meanwhile, in the end of Silent Hill 2, James does have a final encounter with Pyramid Head. Well, two of them. Two of it. Whatever. But he doesn't kill them. You don't beat them in a fight. You don't deal enough damage to disable them, or anything like that. Pyramid Head is killed with the realization that James doesn't have to torment and punish himself anymore. It's time for James to move on and heal after facing the realization of his guilt and what he did to Mary, and accepting how awful and selfish he was. James didn't need Pyramid Head anymore. What's done is done, and it's time to forgive and live. The only thing that can kill Pyramid Head is Pyramid Head, once he learns that his role is complete. Like I mentioned earlier, each pursuer has its own appeal and its own brand of horror, each taking a slightly different approach to try to scare the player and keep him or her on their toes in their respective games. Personally, I am biased and partial towards Pyramid Head and his mysterious and imposing presence. All this is not to say that one horror franchise is better than the other. They are different games that scratch different itches, each having their own appeal. Nemesis represents the physical horror of an inexplicable monster chasing you, over the top and thrilling, a daunting challenge to overcome. The vulnerability that he makes you feel, though, is temporary, eventually replaced by the empowerment of defeating him. When I turn off the game, that's where he stays. The Crow Mauler and Jack Baker are the existential horror of being a prisoner and slave to external forces, the loss of control and free will, and the terror of succumbing to madness. You too get to experience the horror of knowing who they were before they became monsters, and that idea will stay and haunt you, because once you know, you cannot forget. It makes you wonder if anything like that could happen to you in real life, where something takes control of you without your consent. Pyramid Head is the horror of being followed by your regrets from your past. Everywhere you go, the monster looms in the background. Once you learn of James's Pyramid Head, you perhaps start seeing your own. It's so much easier to run away. The only way to make it stop is to finally face him and learn that he cannot be overcome by force. He can only be overcome by one of the more difficult things a person can do, which is self-reflection, acceptance, and forgiveness. And dear viewer, with that, we wrap up this video. If you'd like to support this channel, you know the usuals, like, comment, share, and all that good stuff. But with that, I bid you farewell, and I'll see you again in the next video. Take care of yourself and be well. Later.